Good morning, everybody. This is another edition of the Passball Show, brought to you by JohnPielli.com, as well as St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey, discussing everything going on in baseball, sports, and unified America. Glad to be with you on this 21st day of June 2018 as we get set for, the summer, obviously the first day of summer. The NBA draft coming tonight, so a lot of different things that we're going to talk about. Anything that's on your mind, of course, feel free to comment on the Facebook Live or Periscope feed, whether it's live or if you're listening afterwards. Feel free to let your voice be known. The first thing we're going to get into today, want to talk a little bit about baseball because it's been a little while since I spoke baseball. You have a series of weeks that are coming up leading to the baseball trading deadline. And listen, if there's a baseball show or a baseball segment going on, I think the one thing that you expect to discuss or hear discussed or hear talked about is these insane trade proposals. And a lot of it has to do with people being a fan. And I get it. I respect the fact that somebody has a certain allegiance towards a certain organization that they root for and want to see do well, and are naturally going to expect other teams to be willing to part with players for a very cheap price or a price that you may consider fair, but absolutely is not fair when it comes to reality. So I understand that part of it, and I don't really have an issue with it. I'm not really that upset that somebody may propose a trade for a big-time player and not want to part with what is necessary to make said trade. What I do have an issue with goes out to people that get paid for their jobs, that get paid for the content that they provide. In other words, your baseball writers, your baseball analysts, the people that are sitting there with a job, getting a steady paycheck, and they feel that their job is to tell all Major League Baseball teams what they should do and what they shouldn't do. Now, I would think if you have a job as a writer or you have a job as an analyst, well, you may be making six figures. It may be a decent paying job. You may be doing all right. You may be able to take care of your family. If you're weighing that against an opportunity to run a Major League Baseball team, then I think you should be running a Major League Baseball team. In other words, the John Heymans, the Ken Rosenthal's, the John Morosi's, the ones that are out there that are basically telling Major League Baseball teams how to operate their franchise. And I throw this out there because every time you hear that discussion, are they a seller or they're a buyer? It's an analyst and a writer telling a professional sports organization how to run its franchise. And I'm surprised we don't hear any backlash from this. I'm surprised we don't hear any team that says, hey, I'm tired of these baseball writers and analysts telling me how to run my franchise. If I'm the New York Yankees, how many times do you need to hear they need to get a starting pitcher? No shit. They know they need to get a starting pitcher. And you're going to tell them who to get to? But the issue that I have isn't so much towards the teams that are looking to upgrade themselves. Because there's going to be a ton of teams that are going to look to get better. If you look at every top team in baseball, every team that was expected to be very good, every team that is kind of a surprise and is overperforming to this point in the season, or every team that we expected to see a lot more out of and they just haven't produced in regards to wins and losses yet, every one of those teams are going to make whatever kind of effort that they want to make to get better. They're going to improve themselves in some way. So the people that have a job, whether you're the analyst or the writer, I understand that you have responsibilities. You should report what it is that you report. But once again, in the fake news world that we live in, as your fake news can be catered to anything that you don't want to hear, but also it could also be a story just for the sake of putting together a story. Baseball analysts need to focus on the facts that they have. If said team is willing to make a certain player available and willing to go public with that type of knowledge and information, that's a shame on them, but also that's the type of information that you would expect to be reported. If not, your projections, excuse me, your projections as far as where you expect a certain player to go is based off of hearsay. And it isn't based off of any information that you've actually obtained. And there's teams that could be parting with players that we don't know about yet. But if you're a baseball writer and a baseball analyst, you should be willing and able to admit that. And if you're a Major League Baseball organization, if you are foolish enough, if you are stupid enough to concede to what the media tells you to do and do what they say, then you deserve to have a bad team for many years. And I don't know if there's teams that actually do that. And in some cases it validates the report that somebody has out there that, hey, this person could be had. And maybe in some cases a writer may put a story out that is hearsay, or may put a story out that may be a guess on their part, and they're taking what they feel is an educated guess, and when a team actually decides to go and do it, they look like they know what they're talking about. The problem I have is there should be nobody from the outside that tells any sports team how to operate, that tells any sports team what it is that they need to do. Suggestions are suggestions, but in the end, that professional sports organization is worth, in many cases, billions of dollars. And I would hope that they have the executives and the people that are within that organization and the ownership that are overpowering enough to make the decisions themselves, and not let some guy with a bow tie or some guy with a smug look on his face and say, hey, I write for some kind of outlet, tell them what to do. And I think there is a difference over the last couple of years. This is the last point that I'm going to make about this. You've seen reporting as it's gone from being 100% fact-based. In other words, reporters, and I respect the Ken Rosenthal and John Heyman and Peter Gammons and guys like that that have actually gotten in to the boardrooms of teams and have asked enough questions where they can get reasonable answers. But you're seeing an age now where every 15 to 18-year-old baseball fan looks at themselves as a quote-unquote insider. And maybe they should actually speak to one of the quote-unquote insiders to figure out what they had to do to become what they are. In other words, they had to build a lot of credibility up to be able to ask certain questions and get an answer. If you're going to ask a Major League Baseball organization if they're going to make a trade, you can't be, Joe Schmo from the corner. You can't be John Q. Public and get somebody to trust you enough to provide you some information. So these actual insiders that have spent years honing their craft, that have been spending years getting the contacts that they have and building up trust in the people that they speak to, should be given a little more credibility than some 15-year-old clown baseball fan that all of a sudden, makes himself up, hey, I'm a big-time baseball analyst. Look at what the Yankees are going to do. I'm going to tell you that they're going to trade Brandon Drury. They're going to get themselves a starting pitcher. Where's your source? Problem is, most reporting out there is done through Twitter, where some clown with, 200 followers decides that he's going to be the lead information guy, and maybe his two best friends are going to follow him and say, hey, this guy really knows what he's talking about, but he hasn't earned his stripes. And he's going to tell what organization, needs to trade their best player. And he needs to make that ideal trade as it appeals to the New York Yankees and their fan base. I say buyer beware in regards to where you're getting your information as it applies to baseball and the trading deadline. And I'm not even giving the guys credit. The guys that do the hard work. Because I think a lot of what they say is speculation and hearsay. But you know what? The partial credit that I'll give them in this one little situation is the fact that I think a lot of them will admit that there is not a ton of stuff that they report that they actually know what it is that's going on. Sometimes it's hard to do. Sometimes it's impossible to be able to, report information that's not really there. So you do have to make a kind of a little bit of a dive, per se, or a little bit of a stretch to make a story seem believable, but to get clicks. We understand that a lot of reporting out there is to get people to click on your article. And I learned when I was in school, when I was taking journalism classes, I was told it's important when you're putting a story out there that you believe in, that you put the best title together. The best title together to draw that response. And the fact that we live on the internet today, that it's important to get people to click on your articles. Now, you don't want to deceive somebody. You don't want to put out something that you would consider complete garbage and just have somebody baited into clicking on it when 2 seconds later they're just going to move on with the rest of their life. You want to have a story that exists, that has some meat and potatoes to it, that is worth the read. But you also want to have the best title possible to intrigue somebody enough to want to know what it is that you're talking about. But the issue that I have, once again, and this is the last point I'll make on this topic, is the baseball writers out there and the analysts, and especially these clowns on Twitter that consider themselves insiders because they just happen to be a baseball fan and root for a certain team. Stop telling Major League Baseball teams what they should and shouldn't do. They're billion-dollar corporations with executives that are getting paid to make those kind of decisions. So don't tell any team what to do. Once again, this is John Pielli, Past Ball Show. Glad to be with you on the 21st day of June. Happy summer to everybody. Next thing I wanted to talk about was a story that came out. And it's about former boxing champion Bobby Czyz. And he, unfortunately, is going through some financial problems and has a job working at ShopRite, which nobody should be ashamed of having to do. The reason that it is a big deal and the reason that a story was put out for NJ.com about it is, where he came from. A guy who was a very popular athlete and obviously professional boxer, world champion from the state of New Jersey. And a guy who obviously needed a lot of things to go wrong for him or go down and, not work out in the way that he hoped they would, to be working as a bagger or a cashier at Stop & Shop. Now, let me make the statement once again. Anybody that, works in retail, if you happen to be a cashier, and, if you're in a situation where, you need money, or there's people out there to make a good living working in retail, and good for them. And I honestly have no issue with anybody that does anything like that for a living. And you look at a guy that obviously is in a situation that he needs money. He needs to put himself in a position to where he can earn something. He obviously has some debt. And you're looking at a person that, is doing the best that he can. So the story starts out, and I give the reporter, Steve Politi, from NJ.com credit. He put together a very long and, detailed article. And he basically talks about a woman that notices a cashier, says, hey, he looks very familiar. He looks like he's famous. Figures out his name. And, he ends up, he's there. He says, hey, how can I help you? Nice looking guy, but also a noticeable guy. A guy that in New Jersey was looked at as one of the bigger time boxers and popular athletes in the state. You looked at magazine covers that said Matinee Idol, tomorrow's champion. And obviously, anybody that would go to this particular shop, right? I believe it's in Somerville or Somerset? Let me just make sure. So, whatever. So you go to Somerville shop, right? And it blows your mind that this guy is working for ShopRite. So this reporter ends up going into pretty much detail about how he ends up getting there. Quotes Bobby Czyz, and Bobby Czyz says, they tell me I should thank God I'm still here, but I'm an atheist. So that's the one issue that I got with Bobby Czyz. And if I get him on the show and we end up, discussing a couple things, I guess we could agree to disagree on religion. But, you look at what it takes for an athlete to at some point have millions and millions of dollars. At some point, do a lot of very good things and be successful and be a recognizable name, which Bobby Czyz was and is. A guy that obviously, was part of many, many, important boxing bouts. And did it at a time where boxing had a lot more following than it does right now. You got MMA, you got UFC, even professional wrestling has gotten a little bit of a jolt because of the decline of professional boxing. Professional boxing has gone from being an iconic sport, has gone from becoming to one of the top 4 or 5 sports in the entire country to a sport where nobody really cares enough to follow anymore. And a lot of it has to do with the corruption. A lot of it has to do with Don King. But when you go back to April 24th of 1980, when Bobby Czyz had his first professional fight, a first-round knockout, or first-round technical knockout, against probably a stiff, probably somebody that was set up that he should have been able to beat. Boxing was something that was worth following at that point. And boxing, I understand, is trying to make a comeback. And I know I have some friends that are still bigger time boxing fans, kind of boxing fans that I used to be 20 years ago or 15 years ago. But you look at Bobby Czyz and you say, this is a guy that had a very good career. He fought Evander Holyfield. He didn't give much of a fight to Evander Holyfield, but he fought him. He's a guy that moved up in several weight classes, but was known for everything that he accomplished and everything that he stood for in the state of New Jersey. He's a New Jersey icon. But now, and this isn't meant to be insulting, it just is what it is. He's working as a cashier at ShopRite. He's told a couple different stories. Number one, he had missed a chance in 1980 to travel with the U.S. boxing team because he got in a car accident. Now, this car accident set him back. Obviously, it was disappointing to him. Now, the fact that you're, getting ready to go overseas to fight in the Olympics, the injuries that he sustained would not allow him to participate in the Olympics. But then, the thing that you would never expect to see happened. The flight, which contained all 14 of the boxers and the entire team, which was heading over to a tournament in Poland, crashes. Bobby Czyz's father calls him up and says they're all dead. He says, what do you mean they're all dead? The plane crashed. 100% fatality. They're all dead. So this hits Bobby Czyz and he realizes, I'm supposed to be on that plane. I'm supposed to be dead. So the purpose of his life is kind of brought there and kept there in a divine way. He was supposed to be dead. You know, remember that movie, Final Destination, where death ends up chasing you. If you're supposed to be somewhere, you know, if you think about it deep enough, does death chase you at some point? Something interesting to think about. But it did and it could have with Bobby Czyz. Bobby Czyz got a second chance. He was supposed to be on that flight, on that plane, that ends up crashing on the way to Poland where everybody died. But he's still alive. He fights for a couple of years. He ends up developing an alcohol problem. And here's a guy that is motivated to be a boxer for a couple reasons. And sometimes what you are is a kind of a reflection of what is around you and what your upbringing is. And unfortunately, with Bobby Czyz, he has to deal with a father that is very abusive. A father that, you know, it kind of influences him in a way to become a professional boxer. If you have a parent that is extremely abusive and is completely hitting you, you know, constantly hitting you, it's going to probably motivate you to fight back, gives you probably a good chance to be a good fighter. If you get the hell beaten out of you every day and a bully picks on you at school and you punch him right in the mouth, odds are you're going to inflict some sort of damage. So Bobby Czyz, first of all, has to go through this ordeal where the other boxers end up getting killed in this plane crash. And his father says to him, I would never kill myself except for two reasons. Number one, if I was terminally ill, I would never put my family through the emotions and financial torture. And two, if you don't love me, son. He says, according to Bobby Czyz, not your brothers, not your mother, you. Now, Bobby Czyz Sr., like I said, is abusive. He beat his wife, and actually beat his wife, Louise, so often that her jaw ached when it rained. He beat his 4 children. And obviously Bobby Jr. was the one that probably felt the brunt of it. You know, he would go to high school. He couldn't play on the skins team because his body was so bruised and battered. He broke his ankle playing basketball. That caused him to miss a tournament. His father took one look at the cast and punched him in the face. So a night, 35 years ago, Bobby Czyz ends up getting beaten by his father. This time he's a grown man. He says to his father, "You're dead to me," as he walks out. Now, probably as he said it, he felt bad about it. He probably, and according to what he says, tries to take it back. His father stares straight ahead, doesn't acknowledge the apologies. Bobby Jr. went to bed, and all of a sudden he hears a gunshot. He says, we came downstairs in the morning, and we all saw the blood and brains all over the sliding glass doors. I wanted to find the gun because I was going to shoot myself as well. My brother found it first and ejected the clip. Then my mother came down and called the police. And after that, it was a blur. So he ends up missing out being on a plane that ends up with everybody dying on the way to Poland for a boxing tournament. His father commits suicide and probably has to deal, he probably has to deal with the fact that, he's taking a lot of the blame for it. So obviously with this, he ends up moving up in boxing. He wins the IBF light heavyweight title and the cruiserweight title in 1991. He ends up fighting Evander Holyfield. But after that, he ends up getting himself into some deep problems. He ends up becoming an alcoholic. He ends up spending his money. He ends up putting himself in a position where he is unable to hold on to his money. He's unable to present himself in a way for his family. And that's why he's working at ShopRite. And once again, it's not a shame to be doing anything like that for a living. He's doing it because he has to. But it's an amazing story. An amazing story about a guy that, was known as one of the more iconic figures in the state of New Jersey. And he moved himself up. He put himself in a great position to succeed. He overcame some adversities. But unfortunately, life as it exists was too much for him. And I wonder, and I could be wrong when I say this, this is my, analyst side, throwing something in there. Did his lack of faith in God lead him into the situation and he's in? Is he in a spot where he's hopeless? Is he in a spot where there's no way it's going to get any better? Here's a man who has lived a tough life, has faced some major obstacles. And I'm not saying faith in God would have kept his father from committing suicide. But he was dealt a huge break when he wasn't on that devastating plane crash. He wasn't on that plane that crashed. And God is still there, all these years later, giving him a second chance. Last thing I wanted to hit up on is the NBA draft coming tonight, which obviously it's going to be a little bit of a big deal. I look at the forecast and exactly, what is expected to happen. There are obviously some very good players out there. And I think is there a consensus number one overall player? Unfortunately, not every year there is. You're looking at, was it Ayton, who looks to be the player that the Phoenix Suns are going to take. DeAndre Ayton from Arizona. If you took Marvin Bagley out of Duke, Jaren Jackson, Mohamed Bamba, these guys all look like they're going to be legitimate NBA players. Michael Porter looks like a pretty good player. Mikal Bridges from Villanova. I mean, the problem is, and of course Trae Young gets a lot of attention out of Oklahoma. From a name standpoint, he's probably the guy that's garnishing the most attention. But without a consensus number one overall player, I think you could have a top 10 pick. And pretty similar to some of the things you saw last year with Donovan Mitchell and a couple of the players that were taken towards, from 8 to 15 in the draft. You got a chance to take a pretty good player. So if you have a top 10 pick or a top 15 pick in the NBA, you have a chance to take a pretty good NBA player. Because there isn't a consensus top player. Be back with you tomorrow. Thanks everybody for tuning in. This is the Pass Ball Show brought to you by JohnPielli.com, as well as St. Aloysius Church and School in Jackson, New Jersey. God bless you. And as always, I'll see you on the other side.